everyone, I'm Alyssa, and today I will be refuting Fern Miller's speech on how the extinction of elephants would cause many ecosystems to collapse. She supports her claim by stating that the elephants are a keystone species, that many species of trees and animals depend on elephants for survival, and that when elephants die off, other parts of the ecosystem begin to die off too. So to get things started, I would like to refute Fern's claim by stating that her speech on the extinction of elephants harming ecosystem is an informative speech rather than a claim of fact. She begins by introducing that the elephant population in Africa and Asia has been declining, and she includes numerical evidence on this decline. She also goes on to dispute the claim that elephants are harmful to the environment by citing the pachyderm wildlife conservation. So although it's a nice introduction, Fern does not include any source citation for her first piece of evidence that more elephants are being killed by poachers than are being born. A source that she actually does cite from the Pachyderm Wildlife Conservation, which was written in 1989. This is about 30 years old and should not be used as a credible source. She also mentions Asia in the introduction, but then never addresses it again throughout her speech. So Fern's first subclaim is that elephants are a keystone species. According to National Geographic, a keystone species helps define an entire ecosystem. Without them, the ecosystem would be dramatically different or cease to exist altogether. So this claim that Miller made is entirely factual and cannot be disputed whatsoever. She includes definitions and examples of the types of ecosystems that elephants live in and benefit. However, her evidence from the World Wildlife Foundation fails to provide a date and an author, which leads me to question if this evidence is even reliable. Something that Fern could have done in this point is include the geographical location of where elephants are keystone species. Since she neglected Asia in her provided example, she could have mentioned that Asian elephants are found in isolated pockets of India and Southeast Asia, according to National Zoo. Her second subclaim is that many species of trees depend on elephants for survival. She only provides examples of how elephants disperse seeds and that there are no other ways that these seeds can be spread, rather than naming any of the elephant-dependent trees species. She fails to mention that the conservation organizations like Project Abroad can be a great alternative to disperse seeds and preserve the life in these types of ecosystems like African savannas, according to Projects Abroad. She also fails to mention that elephants knock down trees in order to eat them. In fact, according to National Geographic, their ability to knock trees over and uproot them is what makes them a keystone species. This feeding behavior keeps the savanna a grassland and not a forest or a woodland. And according to Kruger National Park, which is South Africa's largest wildlife reserve, elephants prefer toppling trees, with annual losses of up to 20% in these classes. This reveals that elephants do as much damage to trees as they do by saving them, by dispersing their seeds, which disputes the claim that these tree species need elephants in order to survive. Miller's third subclaim is many animals require these trees for their food and habitats. She provides only one citation that claims that elephants are the ecosystem's caretakers, yet lacks to explain how they provide for the ecosystem and which ecosystem she's even referring to. Although it sounds like she's providing sufficient evidence, she is actually just restating her main claim in that elephants have a significant impact on their ecosystems. She doesn't provide any animals that are affected by the elephant-dependent trees, which downplays her ethos because she's not fully informed on the claim that she's making. Another point I'd like to mention is that it's a non-refutable fact that animals like elephants and giraffes require trees for food. But it's not a fact that savanna animals require trees as a habitat like Fern had mentioned. So before I talk about this, I would like to inform you on what a savanna is. It is a rolling grassland scattered with shrubs and isolated trees and is near tropical rainforests and desert biomes, according to the Blue Planet biomes. So the majority of animals located in savannas do not live in trees, but rather grassland. Now, I know you're probably thinking, like, what about birds? Because they live in trees, right? Well, the birds in savanna ecosystems actually live in open ground areas, bushes, and burrow in the ground. For example, little bee-eaters are a type of bird that prefer open ground areas and reasonably low perches, according to iSafari. So this proves that trees are not a habitat for the majority of savanna animals, including birds, since savannas are a grassland ecosystem, disputing the entire tree habitat portion of this claim. Lastly, Fern's last subclaim is when elephants die off, other parts of the ecosystem begin to die off too. This is another informational point that cannot be fully refuted since elephants are a keystone species, but the content in the claim itself can be prevented. Savanna ecosystems can survive through conservation organizations, and according to Jungle Jenny, The Nature Conservancy, a conservation organization, has been working to protect and create agriculture programs to preserve millions of acres of land. Although Fern fails to include this information, it's clear that she used this specific claim to support that these ecosystems heavily rely on elephants, and she focuses on examples of seed dispensary and tree species rather than providing new information that could further strengthen her main claim. Overall, Fern gave an informational speech about the decline of elephants and how it would negatively impact the ecosystems they live in, through her support of defining and labeling them as a keystone species, by stating the species that are elephant dependent, and by explaining how the ecosystem would collapse in their absence. Most of her speech consists of definitions and facts rather than conceptual or controversial statements, which is why I had identified this as an informational speech rather than an argumentative one. Thank you.
Was the shirt a coincidence? No, it was a deliberate effort. Okay, that's okay. That's kind of fun. All right. You identified the main claim, the secondary points pretty clearly. You go after the notion that this is an argument. You challenge one of the assumptions based on evidence that's pretty old, and you suggest that we can't really reach conclusions using that kind of information. There are similar criticisms of some of the evidence in other places, either the absence of evidence or information that seems to ignore key pieces of context. You repeatedly come back to the notion that this is informative in nature, not particularly argumentative, and I think you did a pretty good job explaining why that means that there isn't really an argument on some of these particular points. Having said that, I do think that that you do offer some dispute on a couple of points. For instance, the issue about the animals and how much trade-off there is on the trees and how essential they are to getting the trees being planted. I thought that you had a good piece of information there suggesting that the elephants are responsible for large sections disappearing, that's one of the reasons that they continue to be a savanna, and that 20% of the trees get wiped out by the elephants. Well, that seems like it's a pretty substantial number. And, you know, which is the situation? We need to replace the trees or we need to take the trees down? You're kind of left in an untenable situation. If you take one position, then the advocates simply says, well, the other one is the position that we're taking, and that seems unreasonable. The place that I thought you had the clearest argument was that elephants live in savannas, and you know, they generally aren't dealing with these trees very much, except when they are in the areas with the trees. And you say, and savannas don't have trees that would allow the animals to survive anyway. And I thought you did a nice job identifying that, explaining what a savanna is, giving us examples of animals that live in the savanna without being dependent on the trees, and the notion that the elephants are having a big impact on this being largely diminished as a result of that argument. I thought that was pretty effective. And then at the end you kind of come back to the same argument again about it's, you know, not really a sometimes it even sounds like it's a critique of the speech, you know, if she had done this or if she had done that, which is not really the direction that you're supposed to go. But I did think that you did suggest that there was a lack of argument. I did think there was an additional claim that you're making at the end, which suggests that she's ignored that there are efforts to address these problems with elephants, that she pretends they don't exist. That, you know, we got the Nature Conservancy that's doing a whole bunch of things to maintain the environments there. So it's not as if this is a problem that is going unaddressed. Is there a problem with elephants? Probably. Is it significant enough that we should be worried about it? Probably not any more than we're worrying about it. We've got a lot of things that we're doing about it, and the idea that they're the ones, you know, wiping out, or that the elephants disappear, keystone species, you know, or other animals will disappear, well, that seems inconsistent with the argument about the savanna. All right, thank you.